This morning with both of our Lakes Community Board and our Rural Community Board members. We've got our two chairs here which are going to take us through a bit of a presentation. But before we start the meeting today, I'd like to ask Councillor Barker to please open us up with the karakia.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tutawa mai I runga, tutawa mai I raro, tutawa mai I roto, tutawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, tae ki.
Thank you very much. I do just want to note that we've got some councillors zooming in as well. So they should be there or they will be there shortly. Also, one apology from Councillor Kiriopa who will be zooming in but not until about 10 o'clock. Any other apologies? There appear to be none. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have our community board members here to present. Just a reminder to everyone to please have your phones on silent or vibrate, and also a reminder to everyone that we are live streaming our meetings now. So all of our long-term plan workshops are available to be viewed on the website, and we also put up a bit of information about them as well. So this morning we've got a presentation from both of our Rural and our Lakes Community Boards. I see we'll be starting off with the Rural Community Board, but just in a short recap summary of where we're at, we've had our long-term plan, like 101 sessions, where we cover based on our 4 priorities of infrastructure, community, economy and housing. We've covered those with a bit of a briefing from our staff, and then we also have had one visioning workshop to achieve some a start to draft the community outcomes that we wish to see and achieve in this long-term plan. That's still being collated at the moment, so we look forward to sharing those. But I am happy at the end of this session to just cover some of those key topics with you, if you'd like, that we've discussed and come up with. So the purpose of today is to get a Rural and a Lakes Community Board view into our long-term plan workshop, and then the following process from that is we'll start to look at some specific proposals for the long-term plan. So our executive team and our staff are also here to observe and to listen, and they'll be taking on board what's presented and also any questions that may have been asked to assist in developing that proposal. But without further ado, we'll hand over to you both, and we look forward to hearing what you have to present to us. And thank you very much for taking the time to be here this morning. I know that this is important to you, that who you represent, both the rural and the lakes communities, are able to have a say through this as well. So we'll hand over to you, Ben. Welcome.
Can everyone hear me? Yep, there we go. Excellent. Well, thank you, councillors and Your Worship, for taking time today to hear concerns from and the needs from both our community boards. And I'm going to get straight into it. I think that we've got one apology from Colin Guyton this morning from our board, who isn't able to make it. So for our presentation today, I'm going to take you through 6 key topics. I'm going to start with some context setting for our rural areas around what was done sort of in previous long-term plans, help set some context for the discussion we'll have today. And then I'm going to move into the substance of the presentation around key areas for us, which are around infrastructure, open spaces, community. We've got some discussion on rating and then devolved funding. So I'm going to move through those topics. Happy to take questions if you've got any through the presentation or at the end as well. So if we start by having a look at our rural communities across the district, we know that rural covers the most area by land across our district. We've got about 8,000 residents that live in our rural communities, but we're also quite diverse. We cover, we've got a number of villages. We've also covered many industries. So often when we think of rural, we think farming, but we know we've also got a lot of tourism as well as forestry. And we do experience some seasonal use as well of some of our assets, particularly around lakes Okaro, Rerewhakaidu. So we have some really complex and interesting needs within the rural communities that I think or we think as a board, that need to be addressed over the next 10 years. I think, the challenges that we see, particularly in this long-term plan, we've had discussions around, particularly around the annual plan. We know that there's this ongoing impact of COVID that we're seeing. We're still dealing with inflation and the cost of living crisis, and I know that that will be something that will be top of mind, as well as a number of central government reforms. So I don't think I need to go into any of the details around that, but we know there's a lot of reforms happening at that central government level which are impacting on resourcing within local government. And we're also seeing, I think, weather and high rainfall events have also placed a lot of pressure on infrastructure, and that's something that we're going to need to factor into this long-term planning. So where does that leave us? Well, it's important for us that as rural communities that we meet the future needs of a growing city, but that our rural communities are not left behind. And that's really our key point today, is to make sure that we are considering the needs of our rural communities, both now and moving into the future. So we're going to present over these sort of six areas today of high-level areas of investment. We're not planning on getting into the details of potential costings today, but it's really just to highlight what are the key needs and desires that we see and challenges that we see as being important over the next 10 years. So if we can start with if we jump across to the next slide, and then next one again. Great. All right. So thanks, Phil. I went back and had a look at the Rural Community Board's long-term plan that was first presented back in 2017, and it was really interesting because a number of those issues that were raised by the first board have actually been addressed. However, there are still a number of things that are still with us today, a number of challenges that either are still concerns, and we expect them to still be concerns moving through the next 10 years. And then there are some things that are still needing to be addressed and that we would see as being a priority for the next 10 years. So we talk about road safety and maintenance concerns as being something that we've been talking about from the Rural Board since 2017. We know that's still an issue around our community. More sustainable and environmentally friendly options for vegetation control, the deterioration of our community halls, and groundwater contamination in Mamaku. So it's been interesting to see that we still have some key areas that are still issues for us and need to be addressed over the next 10 years. But I have to say that it was pleasing to see that there are a number of the things that were raised by the original board have been addressed. Next slide, please. All right, so infrastructure. I think this is one of the key or most important areas of investment for our rural communities, because it's often what our rural communities see, and it's what they use every day. Especially, roading is a big one because that ensures access to a lot of key services like healthcare, education. So if we have a look at roading, we know that we've got about 1,000 kilometres of roads in our district, and about 120 kilometres of those are still unsealed. They're a lifeline for our community, and considering our heavy reliance on tourism, they're busy with traffic, and we do have mixed use with residents, rural residents. Our urban residents use them as well, but we also have tourists using our roads also. And we'd expect that to grow as we rebuild from the impact of COVID. So the board's view is that it is imperative that we allocate budget to address the needs of road users across our rural areas, which will benefit our community as well as tourists. So if we break road maintenance down into, we've got sort of regular maintenance that's subsidised, at least in part, by Waikakotahi. The benefit of that is it allows us to invest and maintain our roads with the advantage of having central government funding. So when we're considering investment in the ongoing maintenance of roads, we know that we can get more out of our money by working with central government and the subsidies that are available. So I would encourage councillors to be considering what we are able to do to better maintain our roads with the help of those subsidies. We also know that extending new areas of seal is important. We know that that's got a lot more expensive, especially in the last few years. The budget, or our current budget, is around $800,000 per year for seal extensions. Under policy, we used to aim for around 7 kilometres a year. We're probably getting between 2 or 3 kilometres per year at the moment. So the key challenge there is that the costs have risen, especially in that area, have risen a lot higher than our regular inflation. So those costs, plus the fact that rates rises haven't been able to keep up with that, has meant that we aren't able to put down as much new seal as previous years and what we would have wanted to do under policy. So the board would advocate for a position where we could seal to policy and we could extend new roads for seal so that we could get back to making sure that we are improving the roads across the district and not just maintaining our current state. So the board is grateful. I think it's worth mentioning here that we are grateful for the opportunity that we've had to work with council staff around sealing projects. There's one road that is planned to be sealed, and there are a couple of other roads that are in the rural areas that are undergoing a feasibility study. So we are pleased to see progress in new seal extensions. Drainage was another issue that's been raised, especially with all of the rain and bad weather events that we've had in the last year or so. So the board understands that there's some work to do around drainage, and that's been highlighted in a recent audit of the roading system. We know that damage from flooding can have a significant impact on cost, which means we've got either unbudgeted repairs or early renewals. So we would relish the opportunity to work with staff around identifying the higher priority areas for drainage improvements across the district. We see that being particularly important if we are going to be seeing more and more of these high rainfall events, making sure that our roading infrastructure is resilient for that. I do also want to touch on rural street improvements. So we currently have a budget of $350,000 a year, and that alternates between urban area one year, and then it's contestable between the lakes and rural board or rural areas in the second year. The challenge that we've had with that is really being able to make meaningful improvements with that level of funding available. As an example, we've had roading improvements for Umaroa Street in Mamaku, which were raised, I think, around about 6 years ago. The challenge that we've had there was we wanted to do some improvements around curb and channeling, footpaths and street lighting, and this is just around one of the streets in Mamaku. The challenge is that when it went out for tender, the works came in significantly higher than what that budget was available, and so the first round of tenders couldn't really move forward because there just wasn't enough budget to do it. It's out for tender again at the moment, so we will know soon what the kind of updated cost is with that. I'm getting a thumbs up from Councillor Barker.
I just would like to say that it's actually going to start work this month or shortly after.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm sure the residents of Mamaku will be very pleased to hear that. But we know that the work that will need to be done there won't be fully funded by this budget. So that has been a challenge, and that means that work that's done this year also means that for the next year will be urban, and then at the following year, maybe that's there's some money there for a project in the lakes area, maybe that's rural. But because of the alternating nature of this funding and the level that it's at, it does make it challenging for us to make meaningful improvements in this area. Vegetation control, I mentioned that briefly at the start around finding more environmentally sustainable ways to control vegetation. It's a real challenge on our rural roads because we have such a large network of roads. We saw this in the last season because we didn't receive any tenders for the works. We had a lot of rainfall and hot weather, which meant there was a lot of growth. It has a safety impact on our roads because it reduces visibility. And currently we do one annual mow that and then some spraying. But we know the spraying is not environmentally friendly, and what we would like to see is a move towards more mowing if that's achievable rather than spraying. We still will need to do some spraying because of just the type of vegetation control that's needed, but if councillors were wanting to move towards a more environmentally sustainable option instead of spraying, then we would encourage consideration for increasing the mowing that's done across the district. Finally, we have the wastewater treatment concerns that have been raised up in Mamaku. This shouldn't be news to councillors. We don't have any, there's no reticulation for wastewater in Mamaku. And so houses are on septic tanks, but we know that a lot of these are ageing. And a combination of the geology there and where the water table sits and moves during the winter months particularly, there's a high rate of failure for these systems, and the regional council estimate was around about 50% of these systems are failing or at least non-compliant with the regional council water standards. It is a major challenge because of the cost. Obviously, reticulation would be, very expensive, but also replacing septic tank systems with the new OSET septic tank systems are very expensive. And we know that the ability for the community and the residents to self-fund those systems is not practical, but it is something that we expect that over the next 10 years that we are going to have to deal with because of the regional council requirements around the quality of wastewater treatment. So the board would encourage councillors to consider this as part of the long-term planning process. It has a big impact on health, and there is a real risk at the moment of contamination of the groundwater, and that's well documented by regional council. All right, any questions around infrastructure? I know there's a lot to unpick there, but it probably is the most or the biggest thing for rural communities and covers a wide range of areas.
Just a quick question, and thank you very much for the level of detail that you've gone into, and also considering decisions or directions that were set from the past as well. I just have a question around identifying the priority areas of infrastructure with staff across the rural area. You talked about the need for roading to be resilient. Is the ability to identify those areas more like a before incidences occur, or after, like say we had heavy rainfall and there was damage and then we had to prioritise where money went? Is it at that stage, or are you thinking of being even more proactive with it?
I think there's a bit of both. I mean, we know that the recent rainfall events that we've had, we know that there are some higher priority areas. I think one of those, for example, is Lichtenstein Road, which is now they're going to look at the feasibility of putting in some better drainage and seal on that road to respond to the damage that was done from those storms. So I think there's some existing knowledge around that. Where I would suggest would be a better approach would be if we could become more proactive in identifying those areas, because then if we're less reactive, we would expect that we could better manage the costs. Otherwise, we're having to make unbudgeted repairs and early renewals on roads. So I think it's really a bit of both, and certainly the board would be happy to work with staff, or continue to work with staff around identifying those areas with feedback that we're seeing and hearing from the community.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add to that, what you're saying probably was illustrated fairly well in the weather events earlier in the year when we had the washout at Dodds Road, Galatos Road later on. Some of those situations would possibly have been mitigated or perhaps even been prevented if the drainage was better on those roads. Those are just examples of a couple of preventative things that could have saved us a whole lot of money in the long run. I guess that's what you're alluding to, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the info so far. Just a question back on the budget regarding the extensions, the seal extensions. I think you mentioned 800K a year. How long has it been at that level?
So it's been at 800 for the last 3 years, and before then, I think was around 750. So we saw a rise of around 50,000 between the previous LTP and the one that's just been.
So you mentioned the impact of the inflation that we've seen recently.
Yes.
In the last 18 months. So you were saying that you used to get, now you're only getting 2 to 3 Ks for that investment, whereas what you were getting before?
Yeah, look, I don't know whether we were ever getting 7. I think we'd need to defer to probably the staff on that, but I know that was certainly the intent under policy was.
So it's almost halved.
Yes, and the costs, have risen a lot more than what we would see as sort of the inflation figure that we see in the papers.
Well, that's certainly not sustainable. If you're only 2 to 3 kilometres a year, what's the point? You know, it's pathetic. We obviously need to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll turn now to open spaces, and there's just 2 areas that I think I wanted to touch on here. The first is asset renewals, and the second is particularly lakeside asset resilience. So under asset renewals, we have programs in place to ensure that the timely renewal of assets, things like our boat ramps and jetties. For rural areas, that's more around reserve furniture, as things like picnic tables. We have an upgrade around the facilities at Butcher's Pool, which is currently in the works program, and upgrading and maintaining our rural playgrounds, which we know is important. So I think a couple of the issues that we know about, we know that there's the Butcher's Pool upgrade, so there's some enhancements needed there, but also that many of our toilet blocks on our reserves are ageing and don't have disability access. So those are 2 of the key areas that we're aware of. We're aware that there are renewal projects for toilets planned for Lake Ruafakaitu and Okaro. So we will continue to engage with council staff around that, and where the board can help with its own funding, with the devolved funding, and contributing to increases in level of service where that's appropriate. We know, obviously, with asset resilience around our lakes, I know Phil will talk to this in a little bit more detail, but Lake Okaro and Lake Rurifakaru does see a lot of seasonal use in rural areas, so making sure that those assets are well looked after, maintained, and resilient if we were to see lake levels rise is an important consideration for us also. Now, looking at community, this is one of the other larger ones, I think, for rural, because it touches on our community halls, housing, and safety. And these would be three of the key areas that we hear feedback around from our communities. If we jump ahead to the next slide, this just gives an insight into the state of some of our community halls. We can see this is there's images that have been taken from Broadlands and Rotorua halls. So we have 7 halls, I believe, in rural areas, and this is not uncommon for us to see the level of maintenance and condition of our halls. We know our halls were built many years ago, but they are needing and would benefit from modernisation and some refurbishment. It's a challenge because as they deteriorate, they're less likely to be used, and if there's less usage, I can understand why there might be a less inclination to invest in them, but we end up in a downward spiral. And so we know that when we have halls that are in this condition, our residents will want to go elsewhere if they're looking at holding events. So currently we have a budget of around $200,000 a year to cover all halls across the district. The majority of those halls are within rural areas and are funded. The community does pitch in funding where they can, but that is really reliant on how well organised the communities are and what funding they have or can arrange for themselves. So, as well as the maintenance and repairs, there's disability access, I think, is another thing that we're not confident that exists in all halls, and it's something that councillors may wish to review as part of ensuring equitable access for residents. Housing is another interesting one. We're seeing growing appetite for things like lifestyle blocks and dwellings in our rural areas, and that's really pleasing to see. So, and we know from feedback that we're hearing there's still strong demand in places like Mamaku and Rotorua, as well as dwellings in Kaingaroa village. So a key area that the board sees as being important is ensuring that there's good access to housing in these areas. If we think of places like Rotorua, for example, that's a key hub, and people commute from places like here in town or Taupua to get there. Housing more people around there locally would mean that there's less transport, and that's more environmentally friendly as well. So support for and resourcing so that landowners can make housing possible and make those processes easier, we think would go a long way in making sure that there's good housing available across the district. And we know how important that is in our urban areas as well. Safety is another thing that we hear a lot about, not just in this term. We've heard a lot about safety concerns in the last term as well. We have, as a board, invested devolved funding in CCTV cameras in certain areas, in places like Mamaku and Kaingaroa. We would see continued investment in CCTV cameras being important. We have these infrastructure here at council to receive that footage and review it. So increasing the network would be a positive step, I think, in making sure our communities do feel safe. And as well as road safety improvements around our rural schools. So you may be aware that that has been a key area of investment for devolved funding in past terms, but we continue to hear concerns raised around safety around rural schools. So that's something that is top of mind for our communities as well. All right, so just got two more issues to raise. So this is rating, and then we'll cover off devolved funding. I think for rating, there's really only one area that we would encourage councillors to consider, which is the business and economic targeted rate. So this is a rate that all businesses pay to council to contribute to economic projects across the district, Rotorua NZ, as well as tourism and our information centre. Currently, we have farming contributes about 10% towards that rate, but at least for what we've seen, and this is definitely what we've heard expressed by some residents, is they don't seem to see a lot of benefit applied from that rate in rural areas. So while that rate is collected from all business across the district, definitely the perception is that rural are not seeing the direct financial benefit of that rate being applied. And so, and the other thing is that in the way that the rate is calculated, there is a fixed component as well as a variable portion that's added on top depending on land size, which does mean that our larger landowners, which particularly farmers, I would say, are paying more towards that. So we think a review of that rate would be timely to make sure that where we are applying a targeted rate, those that are paying are all seeing a benefit. Now, devolved funding. So I just wanted to finish on devolved funding. I mean, this is something that the community boards, and I believe I'd speak for Phil on this, are very proud that we as a district have devolved funding. Not all councils structure funding for the community boards in this way, but it's a way that we as community boards can make a tangible impact, and council can make a tangible impact in the lives of residents within certain areas. And certainly over the last 6 or 7 years, as that devolved funding has been applied, we have seen many projects happen that either would not have happened, or we've been able to increase the level of service for those projects, which has made a meaningful impact. So safety improvements around rural schools was one of, for at least the Rural Community Board, has been a real proud moment for us, because that issue was brought to council by school students in the early days, and that triggered a review for rural schools, and out of that we were able to improve things like signage and car parking to make it safer for school students attending rural schools where traffic is travelling at 70 or 100 kilometres past those schools. I've talked about CCTV cameras. The Mamaku toilet was another one recently, where there's a village of around 1,000 residents and they have no working toilet at their reserve. And with the devolved funding, we were able to make sure that that was that project happened and had extra capacity for a growing village. So it's the current funding that we have is around 125,000 per board per year, which was set in 2017. The board's view is that given the rising costs that we have seen, an increase is needed if we are to meet the current and future needs of our communities. It's difficult to say exactly how much that is, but I think a reasonable ask, I think, would be in the region of around 200,000 per year. That's something that we would strongly ask councillors to consider because while the level of funding might not be great, it does mean that Council, through the community boards, can apply funding flexibly to projects that may not otherwise be funded through existing council budgets. All right, so that covers off the key points that we wanted to take you through today. There's obviously a lot of more detail to come and how those challenges may be met, and we would continue to work with staff around that to help in identifying what are the most important areas to be tackled first. But obviously we've got time the next few months to work towards that. So in closing, I will take any questions, obviously, if there are any from the presentation, but again, thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Ben, just a few questions. The community halls budget, 200K per year.
Yes.
How long has that been at that level?
Certainly for this last long-term plan, I think before then there was a very limited budget. I would have to check the exact figures. Yep.
Okay.
We can probably ask staff to get back to us on that.
Yeah,
one.
That would be
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Yep.
Also, you're talking about the housing development in rural areas. So you mentioned Rotorua as an example. Are you suggesting that perhaps we look at rezoning land around there to enable more development?
I'd encourage councillors to consider the options that might be available for those areas. One of the concerns expressed was just not so much around zoning, although that potentially may be a good solution, but the difficulties in process and how long things take to be able to open up land for development. So whether that's just streamlining processes and whether that makes a meaningful difference, or whether there's some rezoning required, I think there needs to be a little bit more investigation into what is going to be a better solution in that area.
Excellent. The targeted rate. So if that was applied in rural areas instead of the total pool, if you like, for the whole region, do you think that would be more palatable to those who are paying that?
I think that the importance of the targeted rate is that if we're going to set a targeted rate that is for businesses, it's not so much an issue of businesses paying that all businesses are seeing the benefit of that rate. So for rural landowners and business owners, they want to see a direct benefit of paying a targeted rate. And so I would encourage, when we're considering how we set those rates and how those rates are calculated, that is factored in, and whether that results in a more equitable distribution of the benefits of that rate would go a long way, I think, in addressing some of the concern that's been raised there.
So if some of that money, let's say, for example, was put into some of the issues that you've raised, the roading, the halls, the playgrounds, things like that, would that be of help?
I would expect so, yes.
And finally, the 125K per year, so you're saying that the devolved funding that's been in place since 2017, and that's been at that
28. I believe it would have been the 2018 LTP. 2017.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Actually, as a comment, if that's okay. Thank you, Ben and Rachel, for the presentation and the work that you've done on this, and wholeheartedly agree with you on your points, particularly strengthening the rural communities and any moves that can be made to improve the connection within our communities, is a plus for our resilience, both in good times and in challenging times as well. And often the community halls are a spot where are a gathering point when there's tough times and good times. So yeah, they're a really key piece of property and infrastructure in our rural areas. And I've had a couple of comments along the lines of the housing one that you've mentioned, just the process around getting permits processed, especially if you've got a significant subdivision or those kinds of things. It's very challenging, and added support in that process or streamlining would be most helpful, particularly if farmers are trying to change their land use or those kinds of things and wanting to subdivide off portions of land in order to meet their requirements under the regional council regulations and those kinds of things. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Yes, sure. We'll get a comment from Rachel, and then I see Councillor Maxwell has a question. Yep.
Rural, the heart of our community.
Sorry, just turn your mic on so we can, our people on Zoom can hear you too. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Rural halls are the heart of our community, and you know, we've got a couple that have got really big issues like cold and dank, and your custodian opens the hall and there's piles of sawdust on the floor, you know, Bora. If we lose our halls, we won't be getting them back. You know, there's no budget for building new halls, so we really need to preserve what we do have, because they are a really important meeting point for the rural community, you know. Rural employers, I think we should make it more streamlined, just an easier process for anyone that is any rural employers to be able to have accommodation on their property for their employees. I think if that process was just made easier, then we, you know, the residential dwellings, you know, it would be a much better situation. There'd be less workers travelling, you know, longer distances, you know, closer to their workplace, more available for their employer. Infrastructure, it feels like we're just putting out fires at the moment. It's mostly, in my mind, it's mostly reactive, and it's just not a good way of doing things. You know, we need to be more proactive, and that just simply means more money thrown at it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for those comments. We certainly take them on board. A question from Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben, for your presentation. The question I've got is, I'm on the Nongataha Hall Committee, and are you aware at the moment they're reviewing whether they should go back to being one of the community rural halls or stay in the urban one? They're looking at what is best for them going forward. It's a busy hall. It's used for even like the election coming up. It's being used for that, and it is the centre for many things, not only for the community of Nongataha, but even for, we have our maraes in that area, but the community hall is something you can book and have the event happen, whereas marae tangihanga take precedence. So I have spoken also with the chair of the committee that's what they're working on at the moment. I just wanted to know if you were aware of them wanting a review.
Yes, we are aware of that. There's of the desire, and we know that the Nongataha Hall is one of our busiest, if not the busiest, community hall that we have. So there is some ongoing work around reviewing the policies and to make sure that they're still fit for purpose, and that may well fit into that. But thank you, Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. And I just had a quick question around the devolved funding.
Yes.
Thank you for raising that. I think if you look at it being set back in 2017, but of course the challenges that we face now, it's not only the cost is increasing, but the challenges are increasing too, and our population growth. So I did just want to know, with the request for $200,000, will there be some sort of, is there a specific criteria that you're looking at as part of that devolved funding? Just so the council can understand, and I think it's great that you're being able to help with CCTV cameras in areas like Mamaku and Kaingaroa, but just so that the council can understand or be certain on where that funding will go to in that area.
Yeah, so we have some quite strict criteria actually around how that devolved funding is applied. So the criteria that has been set is that they must go to capital projects, so it's not funding that can go towards repairs and maintenance. And the reason for that obviously is it's debt funded, so we don't want to be borrowing money to repair our assets. Once that project is completed, they become a council asset. So if I take the Mamaku toilet block as an example, that is a council asset. It's maintained by council moving forward. So in terms of detail of projects that will be applied, well, the devolved funding is devolved, so it is transferred to the community board to use for projects that fit within the board's priority areas. So as far as the rural board goes, we have a set of priorities that we're working to. Infrastructure and community halls are top of the list for us, but they also must be obviously approved by the finance team. So there's definitely strict criteria in place to make sure that where that funding has been allocated is appropriate and going to benefit the communities over the long run.
Thank you very much. Were there any final comments, perhaps? No, we've had a lovely comment from Councillor Barker. There appears to be none. Look, thank you very much, Ben. We really appreciate both you and Rachel being here and sharing your thoughts this morning. And now, if we're finished, we'll go over to Phil, who is our chairperson of the Lakes Community Board. Thank you very much, Ben.
Kia ora tātou, and I say tātou rather than koutou because we are all here together, although we have councillors all nicely aligned there and then the insolent community board members lounging down here. We are all in this together. We're all looking at the long-term plan in terms of establishing a vision for Rotorua and in terms of improving our city and rural environments. And when I say rural, I mean lake and rural environments. And I think, you know, I'm going off track already, there is a slight thing when we use the word rural, because we have rural in the Rural Community Board's title. And so if we hear rural being said, we often think of that area. But when staff are talking about rural, they're actually talking about the lakeside areas as well as rural. So maybe non-urban would be a better word. Look, I want to apologise for the cancellation of our hui last week. That was all my fault, and I was very sick. And while it might have been entertaining for you, it certainly wouldn't have been informative. I'm still not 100% better now, but so if I slip up or can't answer questions, we're just going to blame all the drugs I'm on, okay? I'd also like to apologise for my board members who, once again, through my fault of being unwell, and don't worry, it's nothing contagious, are unable to be here today. They were trying to come last week, but they all have employment and weren't able to get away. So, also, Don, I want to say, you know, I sat in on the last council meeting for the swearing in of Jennifer Rothwell onto the community board. I was really interested and really enjoyed your presentation on your time at the LGNZ conference, and I thought it was really timely to refer back to that, because you were talking about the power of localism, and the video clip you showed was all about that power of localism. And I just want to remind you all that community boards actually are that end essence of localism. And I will come back and talk about it at a later stage, but when we were just talking about, or when Ben was just talking about devolved funding and what a community board can do with that devolved funding, once again, that is the absolute rubber hitting the road on localism, on a focused board saying our community needs this. It is of a relatively small scale that council isn't necessarily even going to see, but a community board can say this is something our community needs. It's met our criteria and away we go. Now, I will come back to devolve funding later, but I just thought those themes all tied together with what you presented, so that was great. Look, I've been on the Lakes Community Board for 10 years. I've been involved with advocating with council for about 25 years on water quality and various things for our communities. And there are a couple of questions I'm always asked. And I guess the first one of those questions is, what's the difference between a community board and council? And I'm sure you know all this, but the main difference is that as councillors, you are responsible for the whole of Rotorua. Now, when you were elected, you might have thought, I can come in and fight for my suburb, but you can't. Once you've sat down there, once you've signed your oath and sat at that table, you have to represent everyone. What Ben and I can do is we can unashamedly stand up and fight for our communities. That is our whole role. So we are allowed to raise the issues of those substantially different parts of our wider community that may otherwise be overlooked when a majority point of view is taken. So that's where community boards come from. The other question I have been asked so often, and it has got much worse since COVID, is when will things be normal again? And I have two answers for that. One, never. And two, this is normal now. And hopefully I can make this work. Oh, look at that, I can. Okay, so normal, as we think of it, is never going to come back. We have a new normal now. And what is this new normal? Well, for the lakes, recently, normal has included about 18 months of double to treble the annual rainfall every month for 18 months. This has meant that all our lakes have suffered from high groundwater, soil saturation, they're boggy. When parks and open spaces want to go out and mow reserves, they can't because the machines get bogged down. Council starts getting complaints about the state of our reserves because they haven't been mown, all that sort of stuff. Our lakes without surface exits, they are flooding. So we have Tikitapu overflowing its beaches, starting to work into the parking areas, and that happens on a regular basis. We have Okataina, and it's been in the news lately because of gold clams, but actually when I saw the photo of Okataina, I couldn't believe that the water was actually up in the car park. I have never seen that lake that high, but no one lives around it. The main lakes that have been really ultimately affected have been Rotorua and Rotorua, where we've had houses being flooded, we've had people displaced from their homes, we've had businesses unable to operate, and we've had a huge amount of infrastructure damage. Okay. Now, as the weather patterns have moved to El Nino, we all have our fingers crossed, and you could go, oh, okay, so maybe we're getting back to normal. So what's happened? We've got Asian or gold clams, wham, on our doorstep. And I'm raising this, it isn't outside of LTP, but it is that unexpected thing that suddenly we will need to allow for. And you will all sit there and you will make the most beautiful long-term plan. It will be stunning in its vision and its ability to achieve things. And then all these things will come from outside and derail you and cause costs, cause reversals, cause all sorts of havoc with that beautiful LTP. So I've just been going through this just to remind us all that there will always be these unknowns coming in. Okay, so I am just going to talk just a little bit about gold clams because it is a huge threat to our lakes. And why does that matter? Our lakes are one of the powerhouses of our economy. So we have mountain biking. When we think of tourism, we think of mountain biking. But mountain biking isn't going to be eternally popular. Other cities are building mountain biking facilities to suck those people away from us. But our lakes have always and will always bring people to Rotorua. Our lakes have always and will always support and nurture iwi around them. They will always be an integral part of Rotorua. So we've had all these things. We've had declining water. This is over the last 20 years. We've had declining water, we've had catfish, and we've had flooding, and now we have golden clams. And we're seeing all the things our lakes are prized for being threatened by them. I mean, they sound horrible. And, we look at the Waikato. They were discovered there this year. Within 3 months, they have been discovered down a 100-kilometre stretch of the Waikato. They, once they get in somewhere, they're impossible to get out. So our hope is to keep them out. And so the community board, along with Te Aroha Lakes Trust, along with Regional Council, along with Lakes Council, will be having to put the effort and work into keeping them out. Okay, we were really slow to act on water quality. We needed 2 acts of parliament to get Rotorua to actually put in a sewage treatment plant back in the 1990s. We were slow to act on catfish. And by we, it's not just Lakes Council. This is regional, this is everyone, but it's the collective we. We can't be slow to act on the gold clams. Okay, so this is just a plea to you, to when you're looking at what's coming, to make sure that you have a priority at looking at things like gold clams. So we need to prioritise our work to protect our lakes. Excuse me, I just need to take a drink. And why do we need to prioritise our lakes? When we were fighting, when we were in the midst of the fight for water quality, when we had pictures of lakes on the front page of the New Zealand Herald, bright green, we all started working on this. We all knew we needed to prioritise our lakes. And council, through various mayors, have done this. But I think in the last 6 years, that prioritising of lakes issues has dropped off our radar. We've almost sort of thought, oh, we've done that. Regional Council is doing that. We don't need to pay any attention to it. And actually what we're seeing is there's always a new threat coming along, and we need to keep that priority up. And it's not just in terms of money, okay? We need to ensure that staff know that we prioritise our lakes. So they're allocating their limited resources and time, as well as finances, on projects relating to protecting our lakes. And how do we do that? Well, you councillors set the direction. So this is something you need to, as a council, need to do. You need to make sure senior staff know that you put a priority on our lakes being looked after. Okay, so whatever we include, finally, whatever we include in the LTP, as I said, there'll be unknown major issues that come along and hit us sideways that we'll have to deal with. Right, so that's the sermon over. So a little bit like Ben talking about the long-term plan, I'm going to have a look backwards and I'm going to have a look now and a little look forwards. So where are we now? Well, we review the long-term plan every 3 years, as you know, and I'm sure you've been told all this, but it's a 10-year plan, so we need to remember that while we look forward to, actually now, 2034, what you're planning for, that in actual fact, we had priorities established, and I'm going to go back to 2018, so the debates around that was in 2017. That was 2 LTPs ago. We still have 4 years' worth of projects, almost half that long-term plan, sitting there with projects in the pipeline. So my request to you is we're not to be throwing everything out and starting from scratch, to remember there are projects in the works that have taken 5 years to work their way steadily up the list of priorities. And the Lakes communities, we still have a number of projects that we're looking to see happen in that last 4 years. Now, we understand that their priorities might get moved around, but we don't want them to be lost. So we already know of 2 issues that we want to see in the coming LTP that we hadn't expected. One is pests, gold clams. The other is climate change, which is what we've seen happening live, slow motion car crash at Lakes Rotorua and Rotorua. But if we go back to 2018-2028 LTP, we had a number of issues that were put into the LTP, and we've, just like the Rural Board, we've had a lot of them signed off, and we're really happy about that. But some of the outstanding ones, you know, in terms of roading and footpaths, we've got, we have been asking for a continuation of the walkway around Lake Rotorua. Now, the trouble with Rotorua is it has a state highway running around it, right up against the lake. Normally, any footpath on the side of that state highway would be Waka Kotohi's responsibility. But there is no land beside the road. So the footpath or walkway needs to be on the edge of the lake, quite removed from the road. And then it becomes, at least partially, council's responsibility. And we have a section of that roadway now that there was literally this width between the crash barriers and the edge of the road, and school children have to walk for about half a kilometre around on the road to get home, because there's nowhere for the school bus to stop, so it stops at one end, and they walk virtually on the state highway to get around there. The reason for this is they can't walk on the lake edge, because where they would walk currently is about 2.5 metres underwater. Now, Rotorua normally fluctuates about 4 metres. It's gone up another 1.5 metres above that, which is an issue. But even that normal fluctuation of 4 metres means out of 6 years, there's only about 3 years that you can actually walk around that part of the lake. So since 2018, we have been asking for that area to be built up so that there will always be a walkway around the edge of the lake for the children. It's got even worse in this latest flooding, because one part of it we did have boardwalks. They have all been washed away by the flooding. Lake Rotorua, there has been a long desire for a shared pathway between Gisborne Point, you would know it as Kamumu, and through to Curtis Road, and that was to continue the footpaths that start at the eastern end of Rotorua, and it would therefore mean that all the 8 marae in that area were linked. It would also mean that it would be safe for the cyclists. So you can now cycle through the western Okataina walkway, and people do go out up Tarawera Road, Okerika, through the western Okataina walkway, and then cycle back into town. We are just waiting to see someone killed on that road. Once again, I think the width between the banks and the road is about that much in places there. So this was another thing that was in the 2018-28 LTP. Tarawera has been asking for an extension to its footpaths. It's a very narrow road, Spencer Road, out through that community, and there are a number of pinch points where it's really unsafe. People are, once again, they're forced to walk down the road to get to the local beach. Tiki Tapu, once again, road very close to the edge, to the bush, so there was a real desire from that community, and Mayor Tapsell will remember the many pleas while she was on the council representative on the Lakes Community Board about this particular bit of roadway and need for footpath along here. And then Okeraka needed a certain amount of remedial work on the council section of their boardwalk as well. Other things that were coming up, and you've got to remember, these were all things that were coming up before devolved funding. Okay, so we were asking this before the devolved funding came in. So other things that came up, public toilets. Now, there's been a real pressure from the Lakes communities to improve public toilets. And I'll just quickly flick through these. The toilets at Hinihopu, the toilets at Hamarana, and demand for new toilets at Gisborne Point, Roatu Bay, Marty Spit, Rotorua, although that might be dubious because we don't even know whether it'll be viable to re-establish any assets on Marty Spit after the flooding, and at Atatu Bay, Lake Rota Ahu, and that's a community that has no public toilets at all. Now, the other public toilets, they sit on the asset register here at Council, and I think the next renewal is in about another 40 years for a public toilet out around the lake. None of them are really fit for purpose anymore, so there's been a real desire to bring forward that renewal of those toilets. And the reason why I mentioned the devolved funding is since the devolved funding has come in, the Lakes Board has been part funding these renewals of toilets. So we've been funding 50% so that the renewal period could be brought forward, and this is what's called an increase in level of service. So it is something that Council wouldn't normally do, but we have contributed to it to make it possible. And when Ben was talking about those criteria, that's one of the criteria. We can't be funding something that Council should be doing as its normal business. So since we've had the devolved funding, we have actually co-funded the renewal of a number of toilets around our lakeside communities. Boat ramps and jetties, and for those of you that came along to the sessions out around the lakes for the annual plan, you'll be familiar with some of these. Otara Marae, now that's on the annual plan list for this year, so that's fantastic to see that happening. Merged Lodge, which is at Lake Rotorua, we are going to be asking for that to be in the long-term plan. I think, when it comes to it and when it comes to allocating some money towards that, we'll be sort of asking for a placeholder there because that area is so inundated now. There actually needs to be a lot of thought about what we put back in there. So staff won't necessarily know what the costs are of what will need to be done for a year or two. We need to see the area dry out. We need to see what we can replace it with. But we would still want a placeholder in the long-term plan about that project. Another item that was being asked for back in 2018 was the parking area at Hamarana boat ramp to be improved. And that was after all the work was done on that beautiful reserve out at Hamarana. And I'd just like to say, any of you that haven't been out there to use that reserve, it is the best reserve in Rotorua. It's fantastic. So do go out and have a walk out there if you haven't already. We had a lot of requests back in 2018. The next things we had Sewage schemes, we were halfway through Rotorua, East Rotorua. We were halfway through the preliminary work for Tarawera, and congratulations on your decisions made last month, I think, to be going back out to that community with a proposal for stage 2. Great to see that happening. The other one we were asking for was Rotorua sewage so it is a separate but aligned part of a sewage scheme with the East Rotorua, Rotorua, and in actual fact, since 2018, the reticulation has been done. It was done under the shovel-ready projects and the COVID response. What we're still needing council to do there is the on-site part of that project. So a lot of these issues are reflected in both the infrastructure and open spaces work that they're doing for your upcoming LTP. So this is the bit, I'm just going through these things and saying, we don't want to see these things lost. They have been slowly working their way up through the 2 LTPs since. Okay, we come on to our current issues now, and these are the things that we're starting to think about for this LTP. And right up the top there is sewerage, and really, it's exactly the same as the last slide. It's the completion of those 3 sewerage schemes, and as I said, we've reticulated Rotorua. We just need to install the on-site systems, but to get there, we've got a hurdle of the cost to overcome. We need more grants to get the cost for Rotorua residents down to the same as it will be for East Rotorua and Rotorua, because they were always envisaged as one scheme, everyone paying the same, no matter what part of those 2 schemes they were in. And no, I'll come back. I will mention it in rating later on. I won't do it now. So next things we have is reticulation of drinking water. So only a few of our lakeside communities actually have drinking water supplies. So and it has been a long-standing but slightly controversial request from the Moria community through to Otara Marae in Brunswick, but Moria especially, to have reticulated water. Now, a lot of those properties are on bores. Because it's a geothermal area, there is a high arsenic content in the groundwater, so it's not a great place to be having bores. Tarawera is the same. There's quite a lot of geothermal activity around Tarawera. We lost half a mountain there 100 years ago or so. Once again, that's another area that using bore water isn't the greatest. So staff are working on a reticulation plan for there. We're also wanting to see planning done for reticulation in the rest of Rotorua, Rotorua and Lake Tarawera. Now, one of the reasons for this is the possible arrival of 3 waters or 10 waters, or whatever a new government brings in, because one thing we do know is that the current way of funding our sewerage, our drinking water and our stormwater infrastructure isn't fit for purpose now. So something does have to come along. A real concern for us around the lakes is that if we do not have these as current schemes underway, or the planning underway, if there is an amalgamation, we will get lost at the bottom of the list after other places that have not been looking after their 3 waters. And I will say that Lakes Council has been doing a great job in looking after its 3 waters. Our water supplies, all UV treated, all looked after. We're doing really well there, but we don't want to be hit because of that and go, oh, we don't need to pay any attention to Rotorua, we're going to go and look after this town and this town. So it's really important from the Lakes Community Board point of view that these projects are in the LTP. As I said, we want to see more RIA get reticulated. We're happy to see planning to be put in place for the other lakes. The next thing, roading, and back in 2017 when the Rural Board came in, its first term, the two boards had an agreement that we wouldn't contest that small amount of money that's going to new sealing, okay? Because we were aware we didn't really have many roads needing sealing, and it was a big issue for the rural area. However, recent events have changed that for us. You know, we have some sections on the Manawahei Rotorua access roads that go through to Otara Marae, to Rotoiti, which for the last 6 months have been the only access route for people at Rotorua to get in and out. And a lot of that road is sealed, but there are a couple of unsealed sections in there. It is difficult. There is some co-responsibility with Western Bays, but we want to see, well, that community desperately wants to see those roads, those sections sealed. They also want to see an improvement of what's a private road section of Hamilton Road. This is really complex. It requires support from DOC, iwi, Timberlands. We have applied for funding from the Resilience Fund that's been put in place for all the flood and storm damage down the East Coast. We do meet the criteria for it. Don't know whether we'll get the money or not, but we've applied. We think it's about $3 million worth of work. And then just because we're talking about roading, you know, the people who live on Miller Road at Okaraka would love to see that, the sealing of that completed. Once again, we still have that strong community desire out at Tarawera to extend the footpath. Okay, we're on the downhill side of everything now, I promise. Okay, so we move on to parks and open spaces, and I know they have another name now, but the names of these areas change so much, I can't keep up with them. So we're just calling it parks and open spaces, okay? And we work really closely with parks and open spaces. Most of the stuff that the Community Board does is in conjunction or in tandem with parks and open spaces. So the first thing that's really important for us, and once again, this isn't necessarily a dollar thing, this is we need to be looking at all our assets around our lakes and the resilience of them in the face of fluctuating water, lake levels and climate change. We need to be looking at our asset renewals, and we need to be maintaining sufficient amount of money, and this is a money thing, to maintain our levels of service. And at the moment, we're, you know, parks and open spaces, total asset renewal budget isn't enough to do everything they need to do, let alone, you know, isn't enough to do what we need to do around the lakes, let alone everywhere. And that's where the Community Board part funding projects with them has come in. We want to see improvements in reserve facilities. So as we move through the 21st century, you know, the demands of our communities for the types of facility have risen. You know, whereas before they might have been happy with a park bench, now they want a picnic table, now they would like a barbecue, and actually we'd quite like them to have an electric barbecue instead of going into the bush just behind you and chopping down the $10,000 worth of trees we just planted 3 years ago. Okay, now I move on to one of these big unknowns, and it's Rotorua, and this is really about the reinstatements of all our public assets that now are underwater, damaged, destroyed by the slow flood that's happened out there. And, you know, we look at what happened on the East Coast at the beginning of the year, and we saw this huge amount of water sweep through there in a couple of days and then recede, leaving mud and crap everywhere. What's been happening out at Rotorua and Rotorua is people have been sitting in their houses watching that flood come towards them day in, day out, seeing it come into their property, being unable to stop it. So, and thank you, Council, for your decision to offer rates relief to those businesses and those properties that were uninhabitable. A lot of thanks has come back from that community. I hope it has filtered through to you, because there was a huge amount of relief in the community and a real feeling that Council was supporting them. And that is one thing I do get from that community, a feeling that both councils, Regional and Lakes Council, are sitting there behind them, helping them. And we're really not getting a lot of aggression out of those communities over things, I think because we front-footed all this stuff with them. So congratulations. You know, I've mentioned it, the repair of Manawahe and Pongakawa Valley roads. Now, the road going in to Rotorua, still underwater. We need the water to completely recede from it before we actually know what we'll need to do there. But it's pretty obvious we're going to have to build sections of it up so it doesn't get flooded next time. And also, there have been a number of underslips along that road, and those areas are going to have to be fixed. So this is an unknown. You know, this is something that we may not know when you're setting your budgets for the long-term plan, but nevertheless it is something you're going to have to do. There is a community of 80 houses in there. You can't just say there's not going to be any road in because we didn't put in the LTP. You know, these works will have to be done. And that's part of that new normal I was talking about at the beginning. And, you know, just to get it back in there, just mentioning that sealing of those couple of still unsealed sections on Pongakawa Valley Road as it goes out to Tara Marae. There's the footpath replacement, and I say footpath, but it's boardwalk, it's walkways, it's lake edge, retained areas that have been destroyed that do fall under parks and reserves rather than Whakatauhi's responsibility. Whakatauhi has been out there doing some road reinforcement, which has affected some of these boardwalk or walkway areas. So I am hoping we'll be able to get them to come to the party and contribute some money, which would be great. And once again, just re-mentioning it, that improvement to that Hamilton Road section. And then, of course, once again, the unknown. You know, we don't know what and how frequently climate change disasters or issues are going to hit us. So Rotorua Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group has formed a technical working group to look at issues around lake level fluctuation caused by climate change. They've also formed a subcommittee specifically looking at what's happening at Rotorua. So what we need to do, and once again, this is a collective we of both councils, Te Aroha Lakes Trust, the Community Board, but we need to act on the results of there. We can't just get a report and go, oh, that's pretty. We actually have to do something. And we don't know what that will be, and we don't know what that will cost. But as communities all around the New Zealand are discovering, there is a cost to facing climate change. Which brings us on to my next little topic, and honestly, these slides are getting shorter, I promise. So as I said, we need to act on those results from that working group. We need to understand the threats that lake level fluctuations will cause around our lakes, especially to our public infrastructure and the repairs needed. And Rotorua and Rotorua, for instance, have about $2 million worth of public assets around them, mainly in toilets, boat ramps and jetties. Now, every single boat ramp, every single jetty is underwater. All the toilets, the 2 toilet blocks at Rotorua are flooded. The playground at Rotorua, which was just completed about 3 years ago for $250,000, is about 2 metres underwater. It's unlikely to be savable. A lot of it will be ruined, just because of the length of time it's been underwater. And when the lake goes back down, we still have to decide whether we should be putting a playground there on Matahi Spit again or not. We need to be looking about, well, maybe we should put the playground somewhere else, because we don't know what will happen with Matahi Spit. And the reason I say that, when I was a kid, which was, well, I was a teenager in the 70s, was the last time Rotorua flooded to this level. Now, before there was no Matahi Spit. It was just a big bay down that end of Rotorua. Matahi Spit formed from the wave action and the silt moving through the lake as the lake level came down. But before that, there was never any spit there. So there may not, as the lake level goes, it might suck it all out again. We don't know what's happening there. So that, that's the relocation of public assets, and that could include moving boat ramps to new locations, and that brings with it a whole lot of issues, working with Te Aroha Lakes in terms of where they're comfortable for us to be putting public assets like boat ramps, negotiating with them over relocating. And once again, it comes back to we need to recognise the need to prioritise these mitigations for climate change and the impacts on our lakes areas. And that comes back to you setting a direction for our staff to prioritise these issues. Right, community safety, and because there's been a lot about community safety in Rotorua for the last few years. And I just wanted to just remind you that we have community safety issues out around our lakes and in our lakeside communities. It looks a little different to in town. So we get levels of intimidation. We get groups coming over out from town or from Kawerau or from Whakatane or wherever, coming along and doing burnouts in our intersections. We get car racing on our lakeside and rural roads. The police are half an hour to 3/4 of an hour away. So by the time they get there, whatever's been happening is long gone. And often the areas that it's happening in, there's only a very small population. So I can think of one street out at East Rotoiti, where there have been ongoing issues. There are only 2 permanent residents in that street. So they will ring me and tell me that something's happening, but they're never going to report it because they're terrified of retaliation. They think if the police come out to stop whoever's doing whatever, those people are going to come back 2 days later and they're going to go, it was you. So very low level of reporting is happening. So this means that we get calls for CCTV quite a lot from our communities, and it is a good solution for our communities because it removes that finger pointing. It's that CCTV that's caused it, that has got a police response. So we would love to see council understanding that it isn't just CBD that needs cameras. It is our lakeside communities as well as our rural communities. Now, look, I know a lot of this is issues for the police. So I guess what I'm requesting is that council help us to encourage police to be more active in our communities. We don't see them out there, you know, and please, while you're working with police on your urban issues, please get them to look at our lake and rural issues as well. Okay. Rating.
Hey, Phil.
Yep.
I'm just mindful of the time. We've just gone on 11 a.m. I don't want to rush you. So perhaps what I suggest is we take a short morning tea break together.
Sure.
And then we can return and finish off your presentations and have any questions, if that's okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
So for those who are live streaming and for our staff, we'll return back here at 20 past 11 in 20 minutes. Thank you. And community board members, please join us in the green room for a cuppa and some morning. We just want to thank our Rural Community Board members for their presentation this morning. They're going to shoot off now, and we will now complete our remaining presentation from Phil, our Lakes Community Board chairperson. Just a reminder, we will leave a little bit of time for questions, and then also I'll provide a brief update on the community outcomes and where we've landed with those in the meantime. Back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Your Worship. Right, we move on to rating. So I just have a few comments here. And the first one is that some of the issues I'm going to raise under ratings aren't things rates you're necessarily going to set this year, but they are rates you're going to set in this long-term plan. And of course, the rates you set for are what fund the long-term plan. So I'm going to say, the first one I'm going to talk about is the targeted rates around our lakes community for sewerage schemes, and especially the schemes yet to be completed, which are East Rotorua, Lake Tarawera, and hopefully Lake Rotorua. And I think what we need to be doing, or councillors need to be doing, and I'll be very happy to help you on this, is to look at the contribution that council makes to these schemes. Now, currently, council contributes $1,500, and it's been $1,500 since the first sewerage scheme went in at Lake Okaraka back in 2006. So it's not far off 20 years, and if we think of inflation that's happened since then, and the inflation cost of our sewerage schemes, I think back in 2006, the contribution was about $8,000 per property. We're looking at a lot more than that for East Rotorua and Rotorua, and of course we saw the figures that were put against the proposals for Lake Tarawera. So, you know, that $1,500 doesn't really go very far anymore. And East Rotorua and Rotorua too, I'd just like to remind you, are some of the poorest communities in Rotorua. You know, in every statistic, every census, they rate lowly. So I think when I first came back onto the board, the census 10 years ago, the average household income for East Rotorua was 26,000 household, not person, household. In the latest census, the average household income is 28,000. So virtually unchanged, to be honest. So we need to remember that whatever that targeted rate is going to be a huge burden on them. And I think there's a need just to meet inflation and to meet fairness for those communities, especially that community. We need to significantly increase the council contribution from that $1,500 to reflect inflation. And, you know, look, as I said, it isn't something you have to decide this year, but next year, following year, will be when you need to decide this. I would be pleading with you to be increasing that contribution to $5,000. Okay? I think that's about where it should sit, given inflation and the increase in cost of these schemes and the high cost of these remaining schemes. The schemes left till the end were always going to be the most difficult, the most expensive ones. So I've had too many biscuits now and I'm getting confused about which buttons to press. Okay, the next issue I'm going to raise in terms of rating, and it's a little bit like Ben raised the business targeted rate for rural, an issue that has floated around council and the lakes areas for a number of LTP reviews now, has holiday homes or Airbnbs, and a desire I understand, to meet the issues that Airbnbs or short-term rentals were causing, especially in the city pre-COVID times, and in recognition that we have a shortage of houses, and a lot of houses that could be rentals are taken up by short-term rentals. It's a little different around the lakes. You know, batches on the short-term rental sites, they're quite different to urban properties. They'll never be rented out because they're a family's holiday place. They go there once, twice, 3 times a year, and what they tend to do is put them on Airbnb or book a batch or something like that for the periods when they're not there. They're not going to be able to rent them out long term because they want to use them, and I know this because I rent in our lakes area, and in the first place I rented, I could be there for 9 months, and then I had to move out over summer while the owners came and used, and I was very grateful because I needed somewhere to live, but you know, then I would camp at friends' places for 3 months of the year. So it isn't the same situation as in town. So I think that if council, and when you're looking at your rating policies, are looking at doing something about Airbnbs, I think we need to have different criteria in place to any rating regime on that for the lakeside communities. Now, I don't quite know how that would look. You know, perhaps there is a contribution towards the tourism part of rates that businesses get, that motels get, a graduated situation. I don't really know how it would work, but the board would really like to be part of the discussion and part of assessing and working out what that rating regime on short-term rentals for lakeside properties would be. So I'm not saying we have a solution we can offer you, but we would like to be part of creating the solution. Okay, so that's I guess the other thing I would point out about rating is that in years gone by, we used to have a differential. So the Lakeside's community, in effect, paid about half the level of rates, and 50%, and it went up to 60%, and 70, 80, 90, and now it's 1-to-1. So we pay exactly the same rates as a domestic property in town for a domestic property out around the lakes. However, that differential was in recognition that we perhaps didn't get the same level of service, or we were remote from services that we could access. So the library, where it might be 5 minutes for someone to go down the road to the library from town, for us it's an hour to an hour and a half round trip. So I think the thing here I'd just like to reinforce is that since we do pay one-on-one, I think our communities do expect more from council these days, and I think that's appropriate, that we expect more in terms of the level of services we see in our communities. Okay, so we move on to devolved funding. So you can tell we're getting really close to the end here. I saved the best for last. Okay, and building on what Ben said, and I support everything he said about the devolved funding, but since 2017, because we got a year's worth of devolved funding and then it was put into the LTP in 2018, and then 2021 it was renewed at the same level. So for us, for the lakes, it's enabled us to achieve a huge amount in a number of projects in our communities. And one of the first things I've already mentioned was renewing public toilets. So we entered into an arrangement with council that we would co-fund 50% of public toilet renewals. Now, these were not big, flash, million-dollar toilet blocks. These were taking the existing toilet blocks, putting new fittings in, making them fit for purpose, you know, getting rid of changing room areas that were unused and made women especially feel unsafe going into dark, isolated spaces, or coming out of a toilet into a dark, isolated space. When we surveyed everyone, that was the biggest thing that we got back from women, that they didn't feel safe in the toilets. So we came up with relatively cost-effective ways of improving these toilets. We would half fund along with council, and we've done quite a few of these around our areas. We've done things like provide AEDs into all our communities now, so every single lakeside community has at least one defibrillator publicly available, and we have saved lives with these. We've had 3 people's lives saved by the defibrillator, so money well spent. We've done improvements to our community halls, and unlike the rural community board, our community halls are few and far between and are owned by the communities. They're not council halls, they're buildings that have been funded and built by the communities. And they're not necessarily just a community hall. Sometimes they're our local sports club or something like that. But what we've done is we've been able to put heat pumps into them. One of the community halls, we funded them to rebuild their kitchen and convert to gas, so it could be used as a civil defence space, you know, and still have cooking and water heating and all those sorts of things if the power's off, which is something that happens on a monotonously regular basis out around the lakes. We've improved playgrounds and reserves. So especially when council's been doing work on a reserve, we have provided equipment above and beyond what council would normally put into that redevelopment. So at Hamarana, council ran out of money to finish the whole project, so we provided the money for the picnic tables, planting around the playgrounds, stuff like that. With playground redevelopments, we have provided extra playground equipment that wouldn't have been there. And you know, one piece of playground equipment can cost $50,000. So that $125,000 doesn't go very far. We've done a lot more than that as well. But over the period of the last 6 years, the costs of doing these things has just shot up. So, for instance, the first public toilet we renewed, we put in $40,000, council put in $40,000. The last public toilet we renewed cost $170,000. So it had over doubled in cost. And that's it's not a flash toilet, it's a nice toilet now. But that is just the way costs have gone in the last 6 years. So there we go, you see, it's on the screen. Costs have gone up. So, as been mentioned, we have really well-established criteria to make sure we're spending wisely. The devolved funding, it is a decision of the community board. It's not a decision by council, it's of the community board. As I said earlier in my presentation, tends to be things that would be too small or too far down the priority list for council to action. You know, if something's too small, it just isn't in a budget. They can't, you know, and I tell you, trying to buy an AED, which is under $4,000, takes months, even though we've got the money. So these things, you know, without the community board, without the devolved funding, these things just wouldn't be happening for our community. But that $125,000 is in the lakes area where we have a number of projects stacking up that we're wanting to get through, where we're struggling to fund 2 a year, if that. So just like Ben, we would like to see that devolved funding increase to $200,000 per year. I'd say at least $200,000. You know, in a way, perhaps the lakes area has had longer working on this sort of stuff than the rural board, so we have a longer list of projects, and a lot of them are capital, and well, they're all capital projects, but a lot of them are expensive to do. So we think that along with the rural board, that 200,000 would be great. Would love more, of course. In fact, you know, you could give us 750,000 a year and we would take over all our renewals for parks and open spaces and quite a bit of the infrastructure, just putting it out there. And you wouldn't have to think about it at all. But no, 200,000 would be great. So with that, it brings us to the promised land, the end of the presentation. Very happy to take questions. Thank you for your patience in listening to me. I hope I was coherent. I'm still not 100%, so I did find myself wandering off topic a few times, so I apologise for that. And also, I did want to say, kia ora, Fisher. I'm really sorry I didn't acknowledge you over there on the screen at the beginning. Great to see you, though.
Thank you very much, Phil. We now open up for any questions. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Phil, for your report. Well detailed, certainly didn't leave anything out. Good on you. Just have a question about the Te Aroha Lakes Working Group report. Will there be recommendations backed by research like geotech, all that sort of stuff, that can actually then be implemented? Will it be a proper report, or is this just an initial report?
No, I think the idea is to come back with recommendations. Of course, it'll report back to Rotorua Te Aroha Lakes Strategy Group rather than directly to Council, but Council is one of the partners in that group. So, no, I think there will be actual recommendations of actions that can be taken. Well, that is my hope.
So when would that be that we could expect to see something like that?
So the group has only just been signed off and membership signed off at the last meeting, which was just last month. So I think we have our first meeting of the working group in beginning of November, so in 2 or 3 weeks. And then I think we'll have more of an idea about timeframes. But the plan is not to spend the next 3 years eating, you know, biscuits and chatting about this. The plan is for it to be fairly short, sharp and sweet.
The reason I'm asking is if we're setting our LTP now, you know, between now and January, I think we've got, before things start getting published, then we'll have to have some concrete dollars and cents before if we're going to actually include it in this year's LTP. Yeah,
and you know, and I guess that's where I was raising all that long-winded discussion about the new normal and about the unknowns, and you know, there will be things we just don't know. I would hope by the time we get into the new year and things are starting to get finalised, there will be things that the infrastructure team have come up with that will be starting to dovetail into what that working group is seeing or understanding, so that while we might not be able to give a complete picture, we'll be able to give a partial picture. But that's also a question for staff, I think, as well, because it is a staff-led working group, although I'm one of the members of it, to bring in that lake community voice.
Thank you. And just on the CCTV that you touched on, have you actually identified specific locations that they would be required for?
We have had requests from specific locations and have engaged with, once again, with council staff around the possibilities around those. There are some difficulties, some areas, you know, council likes to be putting these things on fibre. We don't necessarily have fibre in all our lakeside areas. So, you know, we need to have a discussion whether 5G would be good enough for the bandwidth needed and things like that.
And also, sorry, a couple more, just on the Airbnb issue, the other item that's under consideration is vacant sections. Has your board given any consideration to that?
Not really. Not sure what you're thinking along the lines of vacant sections. If you're trying to encourage people to build, not land bank, it's a little different around the lakes. And although we see the headline figures of freehold properties that go for millions of dollars out in the lakes area, 99% of the land around our lakes is Māori land. A lot of the land around our lakes is leasehold, and there are areas around Rotorua where there are quite a few vacant leasehold sections. They're on the market. It's I think in a lot of instances it's a hesitation or fear on the part of Pākehās perhaps to engage in a long-term Māori lease. I know when I was living on leasehold land, Māori leasehold land, I was often asked by people looking at buying a property on the street that I was on, oh, but, it's leasehold land and it's going to expire and what happens? And, so there's a certain amount of nervousness around that. So I think that stops people buying. But one thing we have seen out around the lakes, and once again, I mentioned Rotorua and East Rotoiti, we've seen quite a change in the demographics out there. 5 years ago, I would have said that at Rotorua, we had about a 20% permanent population, 80% batches. Now I'd say it's closer to 50-50, same at Rotorua. And part of that is because they're leasehold properties, they're a lot less expensive. So we've seen, as property prices have shot up in town, we've seen more people moving out permanently out to our lakes. And of course, that's created a greater desire for an increasing level of service out there as well, because they're now permanent populations, not just there for 2 weeks over summer.
Fair enough. And last question. The community halls, you touched on utilising them as civil defence sites. Have you done any research into see if there's actual government funding to support civil defence sites being implemented throughout communities?
So we're working, the Lakes Community Board, one of our projects, and this isn't a monetary project, but one of our projects is to help every single community in our rohi to develop its own personal or its own localised civil defence plan. So we're working with a lot of these groups about how we can help them, where money can come from, and there's a real tie-in with the civil defence team here at Council. We get a huge amount of support from Bruce and from Linda coming out, doing workshops with us, talking about where we can find funding, all those sorts of things. So we do get help along those lines, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Councillor Maxwell and then Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you. Could I first of all acknowledge you, Phil, and Ben, for the leadership you're providing for our two community boards, the rural and the lakeside. Terrific. And thank you for the presentations that help refresh and remind us what good you're doing out there for us. I do have a couple of questions, but I also want to acknowledge what you mentioned about Hamarana all around there. Actually, when I go out that way now, because as you know, our tribe has the Rewa Springs area now. It reminds me always now of our sister city in Lake Macquarie. They have built exactly like what you did, and the money you provided for the works that went on there. The question I have is, one is Moria. They've had surveys after surveys, and we've had the sewerage done now, and how patient they've been. But now, why is there so many problems and hold-ups for the water? I heard another one this morning. You said about the geothermal, but I thought, hey, we live amongst geothermal and Ohinamutu and Waka and everywhere. That wouldn't be as big a problem, surely, as in town here.
It's only a problem, and well, not necessarily only a problem, it's a problem in terms of the quality of water that the bores are pulling up, having quite a higher than desirable amount of arsenic dissolved in it. So that is one of the, well, it's around health issues, and that's included in the health issues, why that community is keen to have reticulated water supply. And that's why it is something that is already being worked on by council staff, but something we would not want to see lost from the upcoming long-term plan. So that's one of those things that we want to see rolled over, kept in there. And so I sort of brought those items up as saying, look, actually we have a lot of important mahi in the current LTP that we want to see carried over into the new LTP. Yeah.
Good one. The other one is, I concur with you on the halls as well. You talk about having other venues like the Ngāti Pekeo Club is a good example, and in the Rotorua Sports area, which you utilise. I think that's working well in your community on those ones. The CCTV one too is this a silly idea, but is there a chance of putting up fake CCTV without telling anybody it's fake?
I think that gets picked up very quickly by the by the people, just like, you know, the hidden ones get stolen with monotonous regularity. You know, if you put up a trail camera or something like that, people seem to learn very quickly about them and they disappear. Yeah, unfortunately.
All right, and no, thank you. Yeah. But I think for the Māori people, they've been patient over many, many years now. They're happy with their sewage now. I'd love to see the water being drinking water.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through the Chair. Thank you very much for your, sorry Ben, and thank you for yours this morning. Thank you very much for your presentation and slides today, Phil. It was as insightful as it was interesting, so thank you very much for that. Much appreciated.
That sounds bad.
No, very helpful. It was very in-depth and I appreciated that. Can I ask you though, and forgive me, with a presentation, it's bullet points, I appreciate that. I have somewhat an impression though that the board is asking for a lot more investment, move forward with previous promises, replacement of obviously damaged by climate change playgrounds, etc. like that, advancement on sewage schemes, reticulation schemes, yet also asking that things like Airbnb or rating changes reflect and, shall we say, benefit the Lakes area slightly more. Could I ask, where do you think the Lakes Board could make some saving contributions towards Council's outgoing? Obviously with our challenging financial situation, but also inflation. Where would the board, either board, suggest we could look at some savings to try and offset some of these investments? Thank you.
I think in terms of that, that's most probably a discussion for further down the line when we know some more details about what you're intending to do. And I don't know that we actually are asking for a huge amount of money. You know, the targeted rate on the sewage, you know, that could equally be funded by sending that rate over the whole of Rotorua, where it would be hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars. There are many ways to do things. So a lot of these decisions around the rates are a political decision, and which comes back to you in the end. We would love to be part of those discussions, and would definitely look at areas that we may be able to help save money. I think the boards do save money for the council, you know, just in that small amount of devolved funding. If you look at the amount of work and projects and community well-being we've added to around the lakes areas, that council would have had to spend 3-4 times the amount of money to have the same same outcomes. Also, you know, I think the lakes, and we need to remember that the lakes in the rural area make up somewhere between 15 and 20% of Rotorua's population. Asking for a reasonable percent of what council will spend in the next 10 years, which may be $500 million, you know, isn't necessarily a huge ask to ask for an equivalent level of service for lakes in rural areas compared to urban.
Thank you. If I could just follow up, thank you. Thank you for that answer, Phil. I'm not sure I actually said big money or huge money. I was talking about when you asked quite reasonably for projects to be advanced or to be, you know, confirmed. Could I ask, I believe some time ago I asked the governance team for a population breakdown, and approximately it was about 8,000 for the rural board, about 4,000 or just over in the Lakes community. Could I ask, would it be appropriate then for, if we did look at increasing the devolved funding for both, why should they be the same? Why should we perhaps look at a differential for the rural board with a much larger geographical plus population basis? Or why would you feel that they should be the same amounts of money? Thank you.
I think there that the community boards work collaboratively with each other. You know, I mentioned at the beginning there that we had an arrangement that all the roading new ceiling budget would go to rural in the past, and we wouldn't contest it with them. There are things like the Rural Roadside Improvement Fund, which we acknowledged Mamaku needed desperately, and so haven't contested that. So it's a very collaborative arrangement between us. I think the other thing is that when you're looking at infrastructure, the number of people in communities, you know, if you're building a toilet, if there are 100 people who are going to use it or 200 people who are going to use it, it's going to cost you the same amount of money to build that toilet. You're still going to need that toilet for 100 people just as you are for 200 people. So I don't think that really we should be looking at a different level of funding between the two areas. I also think that, you know, most probably the Lakes Board, as I mentioned, has a lot of areas that need improvement that council just hasn't been able to do over the years, and the community board is working away at slowly but surely.
Thank you. Councillor Kiriopa.
Thank you, Tēnā kōrua. Thank you for your presentations. And Phil, thank you for your sermon as you mentioned it. And I'd just like to just ask a question about that. What I heard within your sermon was that prioritising our lakes, our waters, prioritising climate change adaptation and resilience, building with our communities is what your communities are saying they want to be prioritised. I'm sure you're aware that we have a draft environmental strategy, and that one of the potential issues that was identified by Stavros was that our staff may possibly need to be convinced that environmental restoration and protection is a priority. So my question is, are you saying that councillors need to ensure that our staff are clear that our communities expect that Te Manawa Te Wai, our lakes and waterways, our environment and climate change adaptation, including resilience building and adaptation work, must be prioritised within council decision making and council staff work streams?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it's you are the people who set the direction for staff, so you need to be clear that those issues are important to you as councillors and to Rotorua, and that gives, you know, it's not forcing staff to do this, it gives them the go-ahead to do it. So I don't see it as a, you must do this. It's, hey guys, yep, this is a great thing to do. So thank you. Yep.
Thank you. There appear to be no further questions. Any final comments? Yep, Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Phil, I'm sure you guys have put in submissions whenever the issue come up of the for and against of the levels of our lakes, Rotoiti or wherever, those who wanted higher, those who wanted lower. Are you able to give me what you might have presented and what is your preference for the lakes to be higher or lower?
Look, most of our lakes are uncontrolled, and so it is the weather that determines that. For Rotoiti and Rotorua, they've got quite stringent controls on them at the moment.
Is that regional council?
Sorry? It's regional council who does that, but, you know, to be honest, I've been involved in that for more years than I want to remember. I chaired the liaison group for a number of years. Once again, in the end, it is basically the weather that controls those levels, even though we have gates on Rotoiti. And I think that, you know, regional council does its best. But I think this is one of the things that the technical working group that's been established by Te Aroha Lakes Strategy Group, it's one of the things that they're looking at, the impact of lake level fluctuations through climate change. You know, that's kind of why that group's been formed. So more information will come out of that, I think. I have an open mind about it, to be honest. You know, I think in the last thousands of years, our lakes have been at different levels at different times, and they've all been beautiful.
Thank you very much. Look, thank you both. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Ben, for the time and the contribution that you've given us into this phase of our long-term plan discussions. Now, as mentioned, we will go into the final stage of the proposals coming back to us with the aim that we will have a community consultation document completed by the end of this year, which will be out for consultation in March or April. So, well, it's still early days, I suppose. That is exactly why it's a great opportunity for you to be here to share your views, and thank you very much for them being so well thought out and considered, and certainly reflective of what the people that you represent would want you to be advocating for, so thank you very much. At this stage, I'd like to just provide you with a very brief update on the draft community outcomes, and it'll just be quite quick. We have developed around about 9 of those. So the community outcomes are, at a high level, what success will look like at the completion of this long-term plan. So what are the things that we're hoping to achieve, that we're hoping to see, and that our community, I suppose, is hoping to feel. This came from a visioning workshop that we had on the 27th of September, so they're still in draft. We hope to confirm them shortly. But at a high level, I'll just run through the 9 topics. So, and these are in no particular order. So we had active as one, so certainly picking up on the importance of open spaces, wanting, of course, to have excellent and quality sports facilities, be able to host international events, and also ensure that our community is, you know, fit and healthy, and we have fun and accessible places. So also thank you to Ben for raising in many of your items, whether it's halls or the parks, the accessibility to the disabled community too. So thank you very much. The second one was around safety. So yep, community safety is a top priority of this council. That's for our community and our businesses, and wanting them to feel confident. Police, thank you for that feedback. That's a top priority of the council, is through the community safety strategy, making sure that our Safe City Guardians or police or others are visible and responsive in our community. So that was a strong theme coming through from councillors, and working alongside our community and others such as Māori wardens. The next one was respect for tangata whenua. So working in partnership with them, and not just for social or cultural benefits, but also unlocking the economic benefits. So appreciating that, you know, we have the potential and opportunity to unlock, whether it's housing, commercial or industrial opportunities for our wider community through that priority or that outcome area. Housing was a big one, so thank you for the reminder of housing and what that looks like in both the rural and the lakes communities. There's some thoughts around wanting more affordable, healthy housing options, not just in the city, but around. and of course some thoughts around vacant land and Airbnb, so thank you for the contribution to that point. Employment was the next one, so we want job opportunities in all sectors, or lots of sectors was what we were talking about, and we also want people to see that we do not only have a thriving CBD in our inner city, but also land that is available for business opportunities and jobs elsewhere in our district, in things like digital connectivity, which I know both of you will be quite relevant for your communities. So tourism is a big one for us as well. It's probably self-explanatory, but we would like to be a world-class tourism and be able to take local pride and have positive news stories, and of course fulfil our destination management plan that we have. Next one was Mauri o Te Wai, Mauri Wai, and that's also incorporates things like ensuring all of our children and also are able to swim, you know, for our lakes areas, and that our communities take responsibility for their waterways, and also again better partnership with others such as Bapini Regional Council or our communities. Next one, resilience. And resilience had a strong focus on climate change, on civil defence, but also things like potentially food security and adapting our infrastructure network to deal with those events. And then the final one was arts and culture. So wanting, you know, facilities that are viable, promoting the use of Rotorua, bicultural community, and just having a vibrant arts and culture sector in general, as well as supporting the multicultural events that we enjoy in this district. So those were just a quick summary. I'll just say them again. That was active, safety, respect for tangata whenua, housing, employment, tourism, Mauri Wai, resilient, and arts and culture. So real high level draft for you to know as well, so something for you to take back. But we very much look forward to working alongside both of you and the community boards that you represent as we develop the community consultation document, and finally by mid next year adopt the next long-term plan for the next 10 years. So very exciting time for us. Thank you very much for being a part of it. That draws our session to a close. And so I'd like to now ask Councillor Barker if, final words from Phil.
Yeah, I was just going to, I forgot to thank you all for putting up with my presentation. So thank you very much, everyone. Look, a really exciting time for you all working on a long-term plan. I know the feeling, having done it. You know, frightening, but exciting. And be bold, you know, because it will benefit our city. I know you have to get to the detail stage. I think Ben and I would be very happy to come back at any stage to talk to you about any detail or issues at that level that we could clarify for you. Would love to have that opportunity to put in at that detailed level as well. So good luck. And thank you, Mayor Tanya.
I'll just echo what Phil said. I don't think I'll need to add anything there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Phil. Councillor Barker, if you'd like to close our meeting with the karakia, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you both for coming along today. We really appreciated your input. Kia whakaria te tapu, kia watea ai te ara, kia turuku whakataha ai, kia turuku whakataha ai. Homie, huie, tae kie.
Thank you very much, everyone. I declare this workshop closed. Thank you.